So first of all, a lot of times when I talk about classical education and its connection to the Western canon, someone will say, well, we need to add more, it doesn't have a lot of diversity. And I agree with that, but we have to do that very carefully. And you can't, I think we have to be careful with just randomly putting any diversity in it, because then you miss the message that it's trying to capture, which is this human story that each person is referencing the other like building blocks. Sometimes people mistake the canon or classical education as just a bunch of white people just throwing books together to leave out people of color. That's true and not true. And let me explain what I mean by that. For the time they were in, they were connecting books that told the human story and that specifically referenced the ones that came before. It wasn't just a random book list. And so if we're going to add to the list, we need to make sure we're following that same philosophy that reveals a great conversation that spans times and continents even. If we just start adding people to the list because they're brown, then we're basically just doing a list of books to read. There is something very distinct about classical education. It is a focus of study, like Italian literature or Eastern classics or African American lit. It has the same right to exist as these other focused studies, right? And in my experience in academia, you have I've seen people studying Eastern classics who are Black. I've seen Black people study Italian Renaissance literature. I've seen Asian people study African American literature. Like, I've seen all these people connecting to these different human experiences, right? The Western canon is a collection of books that are capturing a human experience. Now, as much as some people may want to separate themselves from that human experience, if we do that, then we cut ourselves off from history. And there's a history associated with the Western canon that helps us understand our human experiences, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so the beauty about classical education is because it is so connected to so many of us, each of our ancestors in some way have been a part of that great conversation. We learn more about ourselves by engaging with it, even the books that we disagree with. And then if we're adding to the list, we're adding those who are referencing those part of that conversation. It's a whole philosophy of study that, yes, should be expanded, but there is a theory behind that expansion that we need to adhere to so we don't lose this narrative. And the narrative, if you read the books, now some people have misused the collection for their own white supremacy or selfish ambition. That's the hearts of people. But a lot of these books, especially those from the ancient time period, they existed before race even existed. And so the things they're talking about are not about race, they're about human experience. I'm gonna give you a perfect example. So if we talk about reading Herodotus with a bunch of African American students, I know that I'm getting pushback on why are you teaching Black students this Greek literature that's not their heritage. But many people don't realize that the histories by Herodotus talk extensively about ancient African civilizations. And this Greek historian he actually left Greece. He went from continent, he went from Greece, Asia, Africa. He went all around that area where he lived to learn different human experiences. And then he wrote even the Middle East, and he wrote extensively about it. So this ancient historian wasn't plagued by we want to silence the stories of people of color. He wasn't plagued by that. He wasn't even thinking about that. He boldly proclaims the beauty of the Ethiopian people and the power and wisdom of the Ethiopian people. He boldly describes the power of the Middle Eastern civilizations that were so powerful at that time. And so when we don't read him, when we dismiss him as, oh, that's Greek, or that's white, I'm not reading that, then you actually are missing a whole history on ancient African civilizations and other civilizations, Greek, Asian, everyone. And so classical education, if you base it on what is actually in the literature, a lot of it actually exposes us to other continents,
Yes.
other ethnic groups, other people. And it shows how different people were connecting and coming together and sharing wisdom and sharing art and sharing knowledge and even fighting together in battle. Like, we're missing the fact that some ancient diverse populations were actually participating in the Trojan War. Like, wouldn't you want to know that the Africans were fighting in the Trojan War?
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, wouldn't you want to know that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wouldn't you want to know that we actually were helping because we were considered so powerful? That's part of us understanding our agency. Right now, America is plagued with only teaching about how we were enslaved. It's almost as if they feel like the story of Black people began in 1619. But when we read the classical tradition, we find out that our story began well before that. And so what you're doing, instead of dismissing it or just throwing random books in there just because they're diverse, and I'm not saying that in a flippant way, but I'm saying we want to be able to make sure we're adding in those stories that continue to give a full understanding of what's happening in that time period, and that whole theory around it. When you do that, then you miss that story.